This is a little bit different of an intro than I normally do, but I do need to give a warning in advance that this story has mentions of sexual assault and animal cruelty, and if that is something that is going to upset any of you out there, please feel free to close the video right now. I'll fully understand. For those who want to continue on, prepare for me to tell you a story of a literal piece of human trash. That by the end of this, you will be wondering how in the hell nothing was done to prevent any of his further crimes from happening. The wonderful upstanding citizen that I am referring to is that of a man named Ken Rex McElroy. And this is his story of an over 30-year-long run as a criminal that saw him dodging every possible charge thrown at him. Some, not all, consisting of the following: assault, rape, child molestation, theft, arson, burglary, and attempted murder. But it isn't the crimes that stand out about Ken Rex McElroy. What stands out about his story is that one day in 1981, he was murdered in a crowd of over 40 people. Yet, to this day, over 30 years later, his case still remains unsolved, and the town of Skidmore, Missouri is still hiding a very dark secret. On June 1st, 1934, Ken Rex McElroy was born, being the 15th of 16 children. He was consistently unsupervised and stuck with his siblings during his childhood, because you cannot supervise 16 children at all times. Not much is known about McElroy in his younger years, except that the family eventually settled in Skidmore, Missouri. He never really actually even started popping on people's radar until around the age of 15, and by then the police and local townsfolk already knew him as a petty thief and a bully. But dear God, his criminal rap sheet did not stop there. Over the next few years, he would go on to become known as a cattle rustler, burglar, trespasser, intimidator, and all-around asshole. But even with all of that under his belt, he was actually an extremely good womanizer. How? I have no idea. Perhaps it was due to the fact that he preferred younger women. And by younger women, I mean actual children. At one point, when he was married to his third wife, Alice Woods, he was also having an affair with another woman named Trina McLeod, who he would repeatedly rape, and to him, he considered her his girlfriend. Oh, and I should also probably mention that during this time, McElroy was 35 and Trina was 12. 2 years later, when Trina was 14, she became pregnant with Ken's child. Shortly after this, she dropped out of school and moved in with Alice and Ken. Yes, Alice was still very much in the picture by this point. Not much here is detailed on what life was like living with Ken McElroy, but I'm going to go on a limb here and say that it wasn't filled with laughs and warm hugs. Several months later, Trina gave birth, making this at least one of 15 children fathered by the man himself. A little over 2 weeks after the birth of her child, Trina, along with Alice, fled to the home of Trina's step-parents to escape living under McElroy's home. Not being a man who took rejection well, McElroy eventually found them a few days later, hiding out there, and he just took them back home. Not being satisfied with this though, he returned to the home a few days later while Trina's step-parents were not home, shot their family dog, and to top it all off, burned their house down. Knowing that this would set off Trina, he then divorced Alice and married Trina, but it wasn't for love, or for being the father to her child. No, he married her to avoid rape charges. However, a little over a year later, he was still arrested for those charges and the arson on top of that. Trina was sent to live with a foster family, and this is where you're going to start seeing a pattern of what Ken would do whenever he was arrested. Being that he was actually very good at theft, he would almost always be known to have a lot of money on him at one time, and he used this money to hire a lawyer named Richard Gene McFadden, who was extremely good at his job, and he would always get Ken off on every charge thrown at him. Now, it wasn't just all the skill set that McFadden had in the courtroom that worked. It was also aided by Ken himself, as when he placed bond, when he was released, he would then begin harassing, taunting, and intimidating any witness or victim of his various crimes. often sitting outside their homes or businesses for hours for multiple weeks. He would be known to randomly shoot his shotgun in the air at random hours of the night, making them essentially trapped in their own home, not being able to sleep or even leave. He also favored putting rattlesnakes in people's mailboxes or going to town and bragging about how he would make them pay if they continued with legal pursuits against him. And this was no different when Trina was at the home of the foster parents, less than 20 minutes away in Maryville, Missouri. McElroy would again begin sitting outside the family house and then begin threatening the family by telling them he would trade them girl for girl, letting them know he knew who their daughter was and what school she went to, even knowing what school bus she rode. Eventually, Trina went back to Ken. There are conflicting reports on why she went back. Some stated she went back by choice, while others state that the foster family gave her up out of fear for their own daughter's safety. And things continued this way for many years. Ken would continue to walk on the residents of Skidmore, and nothing would be done about it. He was untouchable, and not afraid of getting his hands dirty. Another notable incident occurred in June of 1976, where a farmer named Romaine Henry was shot twice by Ken while being on Henry's property. The reason? Because Ken was trespassing and he had been told to leave by Henry, and for that, he was shot. Ken was charged with assault with intent to kill, and the court case dragged out for months thanks to McFadden. And in that time, Ken did his usual of sitting outside the house that Henry lived at, and he did this over 100 times before the actual trial even began. During the trial, 2 men testified that they were with Ken the day of the shooting, and that none of them were remotely near his property, and being that it was 3 against 1 at that rate, and no other evidence supporting Ken was there, he was eventually acquitted. So, just to catch everyone up at this point, so far this man has been charged with rape, arson, trespassing, theft, and assault with intent to kill for shooting a man twice, and yet he had never spent more than a night in jail for each of these. You have to imagine the fear and the panic the residents of Skidmore were in constantly because of this, knowing any of them could easily be his next victim. And at this rate, there seemed to be nothing that he couldn't do, knowing he shot a man twice for no reason and still was walking around free. This moment was important because this is not the spark that lit the fuse per se, but it is the fuse itself that would eventually lead to an explosion. Which brings us now to the events that occurred in April of 1980, where a piece of candy led to a literal shit show of events. The story goes like this. The Bowenkamps were a family consisting of the father, Bo Bowenkamp, his wife Lois, and their daughter Joyce. The family ran a general store in the town of Skidmore, and one day a little girl tried to steal a piece of candy from the store, and she was caught by Lois. Seeing this as nothing more than a harmless action of a child, Lois actually told her it was wrong to steal, and she even let her keep the candy. Unfortunately, this little girl was the daughter of Trina and Ken McElroy. Trina, who was still his wife at this time, heard this and went absolutely ballistic, screaming and cussing at the family and of having them accuse her daughter of stealing, and she told them that she would be back and left the store in a fury. Shocked by the events, but not really letting it stop their workday, the family continued on until about an hour later when someone opened the doors and warned them that they were about to meet Ken Rex McElroy. Surprisingly, he didn't do anything. He just stood behind Trina while she continued to go in on the family with profanities and insults. They eventually left, but Bo knew what Ken was capable of, and he knew that he had already shot a man twice for no reason, and that this type of incident could send him into an absolute rage. The following months were hell for the Bowenkamp family, as they were repeatedly harassed by Ken and Trina, almost every night in fact. They would sit in their truck outside of the home and just watch them, every now and then firing his shotgun into the air, and made sure that he was seen by them when he did it. It got so bad in fact that Bo was unable to even take care of any outside yard work needing to be done at the house. And this continued for months, all the way until July. Now keep in mind, all of this is over a piece of candy. And months after it occurred, the Bowenkamps were still living a nightmare from it. In July, the events hit a boiling point when one evening, while Bo was outside of his shop waiting for a repairman, Ken showed up and confronted Bo again. The two got into an argument, and Ken ended up shooting Bo in the neck with a shotgun. Shockingly, and thankfully, Bo managed to survive this, and Ken was arrested, but this time it was for attempted murder. People knew the feud that had been building between the families, and they knew of Ken's past. To the people of Skidmore, this was an open and shut case. A man was almost murdered over a piece of candy after being harassed for months. And what happened to the man who shot another man at almost point-blank range with a shotgun? He spent the night in jail, posted bond the next day, and was free. In fact, Ken was back on the streets less than 24 hours later, at his favorite bar, the D&G Tavern, enjoying a beer while Bo Bowenkamp was still in the hospital. Things didn't exactly get any better for the Bowenkamp family either, as when they finally went back home, they were occasionally subjected to more stalking and intimidation from Ken. People around town were becoming angry at this point, knowing that he has now shot 2 different people for seemingly no reason and is still able to walk free, and they began to wonder what it would take for him to actually be put away. The trial, unfortunately, kept getting pushed back thanks to his lawyer, and the entire ordeal never actually seemed to end. One resident, Evelyn Sonny, begged the town marshal, Dave Dunbar, to help. And get this, when the marshal tracked down and found Ken pulled a gun on Dunbar, on the town marshal. And what happened after this man pulled a weapon on a member of law enforcement? Dunbar quit. Yep. And of course, nothing happened to Ken McElroy. I know that a lot of this seems very hard to believe, or that I'm leaving out pieces of information to make this sound like a movie and the villain is able to continuously escape justice. But this is exactly why I wanted to cover this story, because of how ridiculous all of this was. Even when more residents approached other law enforcement officers, even the sheriff, about doing something to Ken, all that was said is, and I quote, "If anyone shoots them, to let them know and they would come get the body before it started smelling." Not, "We will remove him from anyone's property that he's trespassing on." Not, "We should probably detain him due to him being a high risk." No. Instead, they just opted for, "Oh hey, if you decide to just kill him, give us a heads up." This shows how bad the situation had become for the residents of Skidmore. Eventually, in the summer of 1981, almost a full year after the shooting of Bo Bowenkamp, Ken McElroy finally went on trial. And the outcome of this trial was the tipping point of the actions that quickly followed. Instead of being found guilty for attempted murder, after the evidence of threats, both before and after the shooting, months of stalking, harassing, and years of prior criminal behavior, after all of that, Ken was not found guilty on attempted murder, and instead guilty on a second-degree assault. Out of all of the charges, the countless charges that were thrown against Ken McElroy throughout his years and years of torment, this was the only charge that ever stuck in a trial. I actually got curious here, so I looked up the difference between second and first-degree assault, and they differ via the following. First-degree assault is assault that can seriously or fatally injure a person, while second-degree assault can cause physical harm but not seriously enough to be considered life-threatening. So, apparently shooting a man in the neck with a shotgun isn't bad enough to be considered life-threatening. You may wonder why any juror would find this an appropriate outcome, but it was also well known that McElroy had a history with intimidating jurors as well, posting bail and able to remain free until he exhausted his appeals, which could take years, if not a decade. Ken knew that he was untouchable, and he showed this by going back to the D&G Tavern the very next day, along with his faithful sidekick, Trina. It's also probably important to note that he was also sporting a M1 rifle with a bayonet attached, and then he began boasting about how he was going to finish the job and kill Bo Bowenkamp. And this was the last straw for the residents of Skidmore. The following day, on July 10th, 1981, over 30 residents met at Skidmore's American Legion Hall to discuss what they could do about Ken McElroy. In attendance of these individuals was Sheriff Danny Estes, who suggested forming a neighborhood watch or possibly trying to run him out of town. Knowing that neither of these options would work, and as tempers began getting out of control, the meeting was eventually dismissed. And as the sheriff left town, the residents got some information. They got word that Ken McElroy and his wife Trina, that they had been spotted at the G&G Tavern again. The crowd, they decided to make their way over to the bar, and they started demanding that they leave, practically forcing them out of the building, and they were not letting up. Ken and Trina both got in their truck and they started to prepare to leave. But at this moment, the years of tensions that had been built, the injustices that had been done, and the outlook of a grim future were pouring over and out of the residents of the town, and it finally led to an eruption. As Ken and Trina were preparing to leave, gunshots rang out. Shards of glass sprayed the concrete. The sounds of metal being hit was all that could be heard over the screams and sounds of people running. Trina was grabbed from the truck by several men and taken to a nearby bank to get her to safety. And then, silence. All except for the roaring of McElroy's truck, as the gas pedal was being pushed all the way down from the weight of McElroy's foot, and his foot wasn't moving. In fact, nothing from the driver's seat was moving, and Ken McElroy laid slumped over the steering wheel, dead. And then, the crowd that had moments ago been huddled around the truck simply left, not bothering to call an ambulance, not bothering to call the police. People just got in their cars, and they went home, or they went back to their businesses, and they ignored it. When the police finally did arrive at the scene later, Ken was still slumped over his steering wheel with his foot still holding down the accelerator, and nobody was seen around the area. The shell casings that were found belonged to a .22 caliber rifle and 8mm Mauser, two guns which have never since been recovered. Other than that, they had nothing. Nobody in the town was talking. Nobody was saying that they saw anything or knew who fired the shots. Mind you, this was in a crowd of over 30 people in broad daylight, and still, no witnesses came forward. The reasons for this are obvious, but to police, they still had an unsolved murder on their hands. Eventually, the FBI got involved, and the only suspect to ever be named was a man named Dale Clement, whom Trina identified as the shooter, but no evidence could link him to the crime. And yes, he was present during the meeting and the shooting, but so were more than 24 others. All had a reason to pull the trigger, and many more that knew the town would be better off without him, a fact that even the police couldn't argue with. In the end, charges were never filed against Dale Clement, and Trina eventually sued the sheriff, mayor, and Clement himself for $6 million. But the case was eventually settled out of court for $17,000. She eventually left Skidmore, never to return, and the story of Ken Rex McElroy ended there. And nearly 4 decades later, this case still remains unsolved, and unless someone gives a deathbed confession, it will remain in that state. The town of Skidmore itself is actually still around, and while it has a population of less than 300 people now, it is still remembered for this bizarre story of a man, or more appropriate, a monster, who kept the residents in a wave of constant fear for well over 20 years. Until one day, when someone, or a group of people, became tired of the justice system failing them and took the law into their own hands. Ken Rex McElroy was 47 when he died and had been indicted 21 times, which included over 30 charges altogether. To say the world is a better place without him is a statement I don't need to make. I am actually not even curious of what people think of him because that part is obvious. What I am curious about is if you think taking the law into your own hands and acting as a vigilante is a good thing or not. Let me know in the comments and let's get a discussion about this. I am actually very curious to know what people's opinions are. I hope you enjoyed this video, my friends. This one was a lot to take in, as you can assume, but I won't lie and say the outcome made me sad. I normally don't even condone violence, but this story, I can see why things went down the way they did. If you did enjoy this video, subscribe to the channel, because I put out videos every other Wednesday, and also leave me a like if you feel so inclined to do so. And if you want to go beyond that, share this around with your friends, family, neighborhood bully, whoever you'd like. I also want to give a huge thank you to everyone who has subscribed to this channel. While I was in the process of making this video, I passed 100 subscribers, and that is a huge deal to me. A statement I honestly didn't think I would be making so soon since I launched this channel. I truly do appreciate everyone who has subscribed, liked, commented, shared, attacked me for using stock footage, calling me a dumbass because I don't know what I'm talking about, and everything in between. To everyone, thank you so much, and I hope you all stick around because I have so many more stories I want to tell, and so much more stock footage that I want to use. Like this guy. You see how happy he is that the channel hit 100 subscribers? It's nice. He's so excited. Anyway, seriously, thanks to all of you who have given me feedback and helped this channel grow. It really does mean the world to me. Stay safe out there, friends. Good night.